Why are members of Congress suddenly demanding answers about a sitting president's crypto holdings? Why are banking regulators moving faster on one company's charter application than they have for almost anyone else in the industry? And why do some analysts think the real story here isn't about one politician at all, but about who gets to build the next operating system of money? That sounds outrageous. So today we're doing the opposite of outrage. We're separating the headlines from the filings, the accusations from the actual paper trail, and we're asking a narrower, harder question. Is any of this a threat to the dollar? Or is it something else entirely, dressed up to look that way? Here's what we're covering. Trump's expanding crypto interests, from a company that didn't exist 2 years ago to a personal fortune measured in the billions. The backlash from lawmakers, ethics watchdogs, and former regulators. What any of this actually has to do with Bitcoin, stablecoins, and the dollar. And the one question almost nobody in this conversation is asking out loud. Let's start with the part most people already sense but haven't fully connected yet. Only a few years ago, the man now sitting in the Oval Office called Bitcoin a scam. That's not a talking point from his critics. It's on record in interviews before the shift. Today, his family's crypto company is one of the largest sources of his personal income. That's not spin either. It's in a 900-plus page federal financial disclosure released this week by the Office of Government Ethics. Something changed. The question is what and why now? In late 2024, months before the election, a company called World Liberty Financial launched. It was co-founded by Trump's sons, alongside longtime associate Steve Witkoff and Witkoff's sons. Trump himself took the title Chief Crypto Advocate. The company built two main products, a governance token called WLFI, which lets holders vote on certain company decisions the way shareholders might, and a dollar-pegged stablecoin called USD1, launched in the spring of 2025. At first glance, this looks like any other founder-led crypto startup. It isn't, because of who's attached to it and what's flowed from that attachment. By the end of 2025, the Trump family had reportedly profited more than $1 billion from World Liberty token sales alone. The president's full financial disclosure covering that year shows more than $1.4 billion in total crypto-related wealth, over $635 million from a separate meme coin, close to $600 million more from World Liberty, and additional income through entities tied to a Miami-based stablecoin venture and a scattering of altcoin holdings. Added up, and crypto became the single largest source of his personal income last year, ahead of real estate, ahead of everything else in the filing. Is this simply a businessman turned politician adapting to a new industry? Or is it something structurally different from anything a modern president has done before? Almost nobody discussing this online is asking the follow-up question that actually matters. Not how much did he make, but what did the government do at the exact same time that made those numbers possible? Keep that in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it. Because one recent development has critics especially worried. And it isn't the token sales. It's a banking application. World Liberty Financial applied in January to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency for something called a National Trust Bank Charter. If granted, it would let the company settle financial transactions the way a payment processor does. Think of the plumbing behind Venmo or PayPal, but running through a platform partly owned by a sitting president's family. Congressional aides and former agency staffers who spoke to reporters on condition of anonymity said approval is considered close to certain. One called denial inconceivable, given how the OCC has already approved roughly a dozen similar charters for other crypto firms under the current administration. That sounds like routine industry momentum. Until you notice who's applying and who decides, a trust charter is a small, technical-sounding thing. It doesn't grab headlines the way a price rally does, but it's the kind of infrastructure decision that historically matters more than any single price move. Because charters, once granted, don't expire when a news cycle ends. They become permanent plumbing. And once a company is plumbed directly into the banking system, its founders no longer need a rally to keep making money. They need volume. Transaction volume, settlement volume, the quiet daily churn of ordinary payments running through a private rail. That's a very different business model than a memcoin, and a much more durable one. The backlash didn't wait for the charter decision. It started the moment the ownership structure became public. In January, a Wall Street Journal investigation reported that the Trump family had quietly sold a 49% stake in World Liberty Financial to an investment vehicle backed by Sheikh Tahnoon bin Zayed Al Nahyan, a senior member of the Abu Dhabi royal family, a deal reportedly signed before the inauguration. Shortly after that capital arrived, the administration approved a plan allowing a company linked to the same sheikh to receive advanced U.S. technology exports. Reuters later reported that an anonymous wallet holding roughly $2 billion in USD1 received funds in a narrow window in April, though the owner was never identified. Separately, crypto entrepreneur Justin Sun invested $30 million into World Liberty shortly after the inauguration, and an SEC investigation into him was dropped not long after. Critics argue these aren't isolated data points. They argue that a foreign government, a politically connected investor, and a presidential family business are now financially braided together in ways no ethics framework was built to handle. Some Democratic lawmakers have called it the most direct conflict of interest structure in the modern presidency. Watchdog groups have pointed out that the president's public disclosures don't clearly explain how several of these income streams were generated. Supporters respond differently. The White House has stated on the record that neither the president nor his family has ever engaged in conflicts of interest, and that the administration is simply following through on a campaign promise to make the United States, in the president's words, the crypto capital of the world. They point to the sheer size and detail of the disclosure itself, nearly 1,000 pages, as evidence of transparency, not concealment. When asked directly about his earnings, the president told reporters the answer was simple. The market is going up, and everybody is profiting. Both of those things, the size of the disclosure and the size of the profit, can be true at the same time. That's not a contradiction. It's exactly the kind of overlap that makes this hard to categorize as either scandal or business as usual. And that ambiguity is, in some ways, the most durable part of the whole story. Scandals fade when they resolve one way or the other. Structural ambiguity doesn't resolve. It just keeps generating headlines, quarter after quarter, filing after filing. But why does any of this matter to the dollar specifically? Because that's the leap a lot of commentary makes, and it's worth slowing down here rather than speeding up. Bitcoin is not a replacement for the dollar, and pretending otherwise misunderstands both assets. Bitcoin has no peg, no central issuer, and a market capitalization that still moves 20, 30, even 40% in a matter of months. As of this week, it's trading in the low 60,000s, well off the highs some forecasters were projecting at the start of the year. A reminder that it still behaves like a volatile risk asset, not a monetary anchor. Nations don't settle trade in it. Central banks don't hold it as a primary reserve. It competes with gold as a store of value far more than it competes with the dollar as a medium of exchange. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should, because most of the public conversation collapses it entirely. People hear Bitcoin at a new high and dollar under pressure in the same news cycle, and their brain quietly links the two, even when the underlying mechanics have nothing to do with each other. Stablecoins are a different story, and this is where the confusion usually starts. The stablecoin market has grown past $300 billion in total value, but the overwhelming majority of that value, coins like USD1, along with the larger incumbents, are pegged one-to-one to the dollar itself. Every dollar that flows into a stablecoin is, in a real sense, a vote of confidence in the dollar's stability, not a vote against it. When someone in Lagos or Islamabad or Buenos Aires buys a dollar-pegged stablecoin instead of holding local currency, they are choosing the dollar. They're just choosing it through a new pipe instead of the old one. That distinction matters enormously, and almost nobody arguing about this on social media makes it. Here's a comparison that puts it in perspective. The dollar's global dominance has never rested on the paper bills in anyone's wallet. It rests on three pillars: the sheer scale of dollar-denominated trade invoicing worldwide, the depth and liquidity of the U.S. Treasury market that foreign governments and institutions park their reserves in, and the plain fact that most cross-border banking still runs through dollar clearing systems, whether people realize it or not. None of those three pillars are threatened by a stablecoin. If anything, all three are reinforced by one, because a stablecoin is, structurally, just another way of holding dollar exposure, often held by exactly the population segments who previously had no easy way to do that at all. So if stablecoins mostly reinforce the dollar rather than threaten it, why are banks, regulators, and lawmakers treating this moment like something is shifting underneath them? Because the infrastructure is changing, even if the currency isn't, and infrastructure is where power actually lives. Last July, the president signed the Genius Act into law, the first major federal framework setting reserve, disclosure, and licensing standards for payment stablecoins. It gave the industry something it had wanted for a decade: legal clarity. In March, the administration created a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a broader digital asset stockpile designed to accumulate Bitcoin without direct taxpayer funding, using mechanisms like agency fee conversions. Banking regulators have simultaneously rolled back Biden-era restrictions on banks holding and transacting in crypto, and the SEC and Justice Department have eased enforcement postures that once treated most token issuers as presumptive securities violators. None of that happened by accident, and none of it happened because of one company. It happened because an entire industry pushed for years to get exactly this regulatory environment, and got it under an administration whose own family now sits inside that industry, benefiting from the same rules it helped write. That's the part that should make you pause. Not because it proves corruption, because it collapses a distinction that used to matter: the line between the people who regulate a market and the people who profit from it. Think about how unusual that actually is, historically. Regulators have always had relationships with the industries they oversee. That's not new, and it's not unique to crypto. What's different here is the directness. Not a former banker turned regulator, not a lobbyist turned appointee, but the sitting president's own family holding a direct, disclosed equity stake in the exact category of company the same administration is actively deregulating in real time. There's no clean historical precedent to reach for. That's part of why this story resists easy framing. It doesn't fit the shape of past conflict of interest stories, so people keep reaching for the wrong comparisons. If traditional finance is embracing digital assets this quickly, is that a threat to the dollar? Or is it the dollar extending its own reach into a new format? Institutional investors seem to be betting on the latter. Roughly 83% of institutional investors surveyed last year said they plan to increase crypto allocations, and most of that capital has landed in Bitcoin exposure through regulated vehicles like spot ETFs, which have pulled in nearly $57 billion since early 2024. Corporate treasuries, from US firms to Tokyo-listed Metaplanet, keep adding to their holdings even as prices cool. That's not the behavior of capital fleeing the dollar system. It's the behavior of capital repositioning inside it. The public sees price charts. Institutions see positioning. And right now, institutional positioning says, don't bet against the dollar's underlying architecture. Bet on who controls the rails running through it. There's a second, quieter trend running alongside all of this, and it rarely makes the headlines: tokenization. Banks and asset managers have spent the last 2 years experimenting with putting traditional assets, money market funds, treasury bills, even real estate claims, onto blockchain rails, not because it's ideologically exciting, but because it settles faster and costs less to move. When a JP Morgan or a BlackRock tokenizes a treasury fund, that's not a rejection of the dollar system. It's the dollar system rebuilding its own plumbing with newer pipes. The irony is that the same technology critics associate with undermining the dollar is being adopted fastest by the institutions most invested in the dollar's survival. It helps to zoom out even further because this isn't the first time a change in money's plumbing has looked small in the moment and turned out to be historic in hindsight. When the dollar decoupled from gold in the early 1970s, most people didn't experience it as a revolution. It read like a technical announcement about convertibility. It took years for the full implications: floating exchange rates, a dollar backed by nothing but confidence in treasury debt, to reshape global finance. A decade later, the so-called petrodollar arrangement, where oil-exporting nations agreed to price crude in dollars and recycle their surplus into U.S. assets, wasn't announced with fanfare either. It was negotiated quietly, absorbed slowly, and only decades later did analysts describe it as one of the load-bearing pillars of post-war dollar dominance. The pattern repeats. The mechanisms that end up mattering most rarely look important on the day they're created. That's worth holding on to here because a charter application at the OCC and a stablecoin partnership with a decentralized exchange sound exactly as boring as a 1970s convertibility announcement did. Boring, on this topic, is not a sign that something doesn't matter. It's often a sign that the people involved would prefer you not look too closely. The international reaction adds another layer worth sitting with. Other governments haven't been passive while the United States rewrites its own crypto rulebook. The European Union has its own comprehensive framework governing digital assets, built partly in response to the pace of U.S. deregulation. Countries like Pakistan have signed direct agreements with World Liberty Financial to incorporate its infrastructure into their own financial systems, which raises an uncomfortable question of its own. When a foreign government partners directly with a sitting U.S. president's family business rather than with the U.S. government itself, whose interests is that arrangement actually built to serve? Supporters would call it soft power diplomacy through private enterprise. Critics would call it something closer to privatized foreign policy. Both descriptions can't be fully true at once, and the honest answer is that we don't yet have enough historical distance to know which one wins out. Congress hasn't been quiet either, even if the hearings haven't generated the kind of viral clips that drive headlines. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have pushed for hearings specifically on the World Liberty ownership structure, on the OCC charter timeline, and on whether existing conflict of interest statutes even apply to a president's family business in the way they'd apply to a cabinet official's. That last point is the quiet legal knot at the center of this entire story. The modern ethics framework governing American officials was largely built assuming a president would divest from active businesses, not launch new ones from inside the White House. Nobody wrote a rulebook for this exact scenario, because until recently, nobody needed one. There's a version of this story that ages badly, the one that shouts, "the dollar is being replaced," and gets proven wrong within a news cycle. And there's a version that ages well, the one that simply notices a structural overlap forming in plain sight, and asks who benefits from it, without needing the answer to be dramatic to be important. The second version is the one worth actually paying attention to. Which brings us to the real question, the one buried underneath all the noise about tokens and charters and disclosures. It was never really going to be, will crypto replace the dollar? That was always the wrong frame. the one built for headlines rather than accuracy. The actual question is, who ends up controlling the next generation of dollar-based finance? Governments, through agencies like the OCC and frameworks like the Genius Act, global banks, now free to hold and move digital assets at scale, private companies building the stablecoin rails millions of people will use without ever thinking about it, and unusually, a sitting president's own family business positioned at the exact center of that regulatory and financial convergence. That overlap, political power, regulatory authority, and personal financial upside sitting inside the same small circle of people is not something the American system has had to metabolize before, at least not this visibly and not this fast. Would you have recognized this shift while it was still just a stablecoin launch and a few headlines about NFTs? Are we watching adoption of a new financial technology, or the early stage of a much narrower group deciding who profits from it? How many people do you think are actually positioned for a world where private, politically connected stablecoin issuers sit inside the plumbing of everyday payments? Neither answer is comfortable, and that's probably the point. If this changed the way you're looking at the space between politics and crypto, that's worth sitting with for a second before you scroll away. If it did, the like tells me to keep digging into where this goes next. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because this story is still being written in real time, one disclosure and one charter approval at a time. It's also worth naming what this isn't, because credibility matters more than drama here. This isn't a secret plan to abolish the dollar. Nobody in this story, not the administration, not the critics, not the banks piling into tokenization, is trying to replace the world's reserve currency with a cryptocurrency. That version of the story makes for a better headline than it does an accurate one. What's actually happening is narrower and, in its own way, more consequential, a redrawing of who owns the pipes the dollar flows through, at a moment when the people redrawing those pipes also happen to profit personally from the outcome. Here's the balanced version, because balance is what actually holds up over time. Trump didn't invent crypto, and crypto hasn't replaced the dollar. Not this year, probably not for many years, if ever. But his family's direct financial stake in the industry, his own administration is actively deregulating, has intensified a debate that goes far beyond one politician. The real story isn't a hidden plot to dismantle the dollar. It's a much more familiar story, just running through unfamiliar infrastructure, who writes the rules, who benefits from them, and how much daylight is left between those two groups. The biggest shifts in financial history rarely look obvious while they're happening. They look like paperwork, charter applications, disclosure filings, stablecoin partnerships that seem too technical to matter until years later when you realize they quietly decided who controlled the next decade of money movement. Somewhere in the next few years, one of two things happens. Either the overlap we've been describing gets absorbed into the system the way earlier conflicts eventually were, normalized, litigated, quietly reformed by whichever administration comes next, or it becomes the precedent future officials point to when they build their own version of the same playbook. Neither path involves the dollar collapsing. Both paths involve a meaningful redistribution of who controls the infrastructure the dollar runs through. That's the distinction worth carrying with you after this video ends. Not is the dollar safe, but who exactly is holding the keys to the system it's about to run on? If you've been watching the wealth continuum for a while and this finally made the picture click, drop the word rails in the comments and tell me what we should break down next. Do you think crypto strengthens the dollar by modernizing it, or could it eventually weaken America's financial dominance from the inside? Let me know below.